My name is Elizabeth. I'm a founding director of a small consultancy called Novation Consulting. I am what is referred to as a rehabilitated lawyer, which means that, in short, you should be able to understand what I say today. It should be practical, and it shouldn't make you want to tear your hair out. Basically, the reason why we decided to host a series of webinars is because since POPIA's effective date was announced, which was incidentally 1 July 2020, there's been a lot of misinformation out there in the media, particularly about how POPIA will affect direct marketing. And today is very much about busting some of those myths. Hopefully you should walk out of today's session feeling a little bit calmer about what POPIA does and doesn't say. Just before I carry on, and maybe just to make it very clear to everybody, so even though POPIA came into effect on the 1st of July of this year, it only becomes fully enforceable 1st of July next year. Right, so 1st of July next year, we all have to be compliant with the Protection of Personal Information Act. So just a little bit of logistics before I carry on with today's session. So as you know, there's a session today and then one on Wednesday and Thursday, and I'll be taking you through what I will be discussing in each of these sessions. They're obviously planned as a series, and we are going to tackle some of the most sort of hairy issues for marketers that are created by POPIA. You are more than welcome to ask questions. The Q&A section should be working. I won't necessarily get your questions today. But we will definitely by the third session on Thursday, we would have answered all of those questions for you. So do keep the questions coming. I'm going to see how we do for time today. And if we have time, we will tackle some of them. But otherwise, we will tackle them on Wednesday and Thursday. Right, so the title of today's session is POPIA Mythbusters. Let's not throw the database out with the bathwater. Right, so my inspiration for today's talk was the actual show, Mythbusters, which was on the Discovery Channel. I don't know if it's still there. I don't get to choose what I watch on TV anymore because I've got two very small girls. So it's mostly Frozen. But it was very much inspired by a quote by Jamie, one of the hosts of that show, that said, "I don't think our death ray is working. I'm standing right in it and I'm not dead yet." Which very much makes me think of the way in which people are perceiving POPIA, and particularly in the marketing industries, right? So marketing, we think POPIA is here to end how we do things forever. You know, the Direct Marketers Association sometimes, you know, it makes me feel like they think, you know, this is a threat to all direct marketing. And for me, I think the key thing to understand about POPIA is, yes, it will have a significant impact on some forms of marketing, but for the most part, it changes how we do things. It doesn't necessarily change the fact that we can contact people to market our products and services. So if POPIA is the death ray, it definitely isn't working, and we're standing right in it. The other reason why I can speak about POPIA with so much confidence, even though it is a new piece of legislation, in inverted commas, it's been around for a while, but it was never triggered by the president up until now, is because we are not the first country in the world to implement this kind of legislation. In fact, POPIA, the wording, particularly the stuff that is very relevant for direct marketing, comes directly out of legislation that has been in place in Europe for quite some time now. We borrowed the wording from something called the Privacy E-Directive, the E-Privacy Directive from the EU. So we spend a lot of time looking at how the GDPR and how the E-Privacy Directive impacted marketing practices in Europe. And it's not all bad news. So there are some very positive trends that were triggered by that legislation, but certainly what it did not do is it didn't kill marketing. European companies can still do marketing and do it well. So that is the good news. Is what I'm actually saying is POPIA isn't the death ray that we think it is. And if it is the death ray, it won't necessarily kill us. Right, so as I mentioned, this is part of a series, so I'm just going to quickly navigate you through what we will be discussing. And again, keep those questions coming. I will probably answer them when we get to the appropriate places in the webinar, as I said, on Wednesday and Thursday. But here's what we're going to discuss. So today I'm going to do what I call the 300 seconds challenge. That's explaining all of POPIA to you in 300 seconds. It can be done. It's very difficult, and don't try it at home because, you know, you can hurt yourself. Then we're going to talk about what POPI actually says about direct marketing specifically. Then we're going to talk about what it doesn't say, because there is so much bad advice out there at the moment about what POPI does and does not say about direct marketing specifically. We're going to talk about Winnie the Pooh. Hopefully it will become clear why. If it doesn't become clear, then I'll beg for forgiveness. And then lastly, we're going to talk about why, insert your favorite swear word, lawyers are so bad at POPI and how to train them. That was inspired by the kids show, How to Train Your Dragon. I think you guys are in for some challenging conversations with legal advisors at the organizations where you work, and I firmly believe that we should equip you with the ammunition to have a sensible discussion with lawyers about this legislation. So I think it's important to understand why they are so bad at it, and approach them with empathy with things. Right. Then tomorrow, we're going to talk about what the impact is of POPI on building a mailing list. Okay, so we're going to talk about leads and where you can and can't get them. This, I can tell you now, is the biggest impact that POPI will have, is on the buying and selling of data. Right. So if you rely a lot on data brokers like credit bureaus, etc., to get your leads, listen up on Wednesday, because this is going to be very important, and this is where the biggest changes are going to take place. We're going to talk about consent. I call it the C word. Don't like it. I think there are a lot of misunderstandings around it. So we're going to talk about when it's required, how you need to get it, what needs to be in your consents, and where you need to put them. Okay. But you will see today we're already going to take care of some of the myths that have been created around consent. We're going to talk about upselling, downselling, and cross-selling, selling sideways, any kind of selling. You know, when you are using a list that you created for in the context of one product, but now you want to sell them another product, sometimes in the same company, sometimes in a group, sometimes with, you know, someone you're in a JV with. When can and can't you do that? And the good news is there's always a way of doing it. It might just be slightly different to how you do it now. We're going to talk about whatever you do, don't just reconsent your whole database. Right, that's called throwing the database out with the bathwater, right? So just be very, very cautious. Reconsenting your database should absolutely be your last resort. I can't recall that I've ever advised the client just to do that blindly, because you will lose, if you're lucky, 90% of your database. So that's why it's big and bold. Don't just reconsent your database. There are other ways of thinking about it. And, you know, it bears repeating, I believe. Then on our last session on Thursday, we're going to start off with the previous sessions were delightful, Elizabeth, but what must I do now? Right. So I really want to leave you guys with a bit of a to-do list. We're going to talk about what makes people complain to the information regulators, so things that you should absolutely not do. We're going to talk about how to deal with it if something goes wrong. So if someone complains with the regulator, you know, what will happen then? I think it's important to plan for it. We're going to talk about an interesting new ways of thinking about the role of privacy in marketing. And I've got some interesting research to share with you guys on how privacy and POPI compliance can be good for you. And then we're going to end off with 10 things you should be doing right now. Right, so we're going to end off on a very practical note. And then, as I mentioned, we will leave more than enough time to answer all of the questions that you guys might have. We will possibly start answering those questions already on Wednesday. So keep them coming. Right, so now I need to just first do some light stretching so that I can do my 300-second challenge for POPI. So for many of you, this might be the first time that you are thinking about the Protection of Personal Information Act. As I mentioned, it came into force a long time ago, actually, or parts of it. It was put on the books by Parliament already in 2013, and then it took incredibly long for them to decide to pull the trigger. That then obviously happened during 2020, because this is the year when, you know, things happen. The president announced that the most important parts of POPI, certainly for this conversation, came into force on the 1st of July this year, and that gives us until the 1st of July next year to become compliant, right? So we're in this sort of 1-year grace period. For many of you be thinking, what is this act about? I mean, if you if you were only to think about, to read what is in the media, you would be forgiven if you thought that it was just about spam, right? Probably did about 100 interviews when the effective date was announced, and all of the journalists just asked me about spam. Will this end spam? Can we still receive spam? Can you still send spam? It was just spam, spam, spam. And actually, it's not really what POPI is about. And also, it's dangerous just to focus on that one aspect of POPI. So I thought in 300 seconds, let me give you an overview of the whole act, because the whole act, the entire piece of legislation, can impact how your marketing operations work. And it will affect even companies that do no direct marketing to speak of. Right, so POPI in a picture. This is the picture, right? So all of the rules or principles that are established by POPI, you can find or plot somewhere on this picture. And the first thing to understand is POPI applies to any personal information that you have about someone, right? And that someone can be an individual, it can be a prospective customer, it can be an existing customer, it can be an employee, it can be a prospective employee. Sometimes organizations have information about the public or visitors. It can also be information that you have relating to companies. And I want you to just hear this bit carefully, right? So POPI also protects the personal information of companies or organizations. That means that it also applies to B2B marketing, right? So, and this is the biggest difference between POPI and the data protection laws in other parts of the world. There are only 2 countries in the world that protect companies. It's us and Colombia. For some reason, when I say this, I always picture a party and there were people drinking a lot of rum and they decided that this is a good idea. Let's protect organizations. I personally think that it was a good idea. But so B2B marketing is also affected by POPI. Right, so what does the legislation say you can do with personal information? Well, it says whatever you do with personal information, you must keep it secure. And information security is about 3 things. And this is the outside layers here, the outside 3 layers. There's something called the CIA triad, which is a concept in information security management. It says we must keep that information confidential. We must make sure that it is a high integrity. And what integrity means is we need to make sure that the information that we have is true, right? So if you have me on a database and you've got my cell phone number and my email address, how sure are you that that is the correct cell phone number and email address that has been assigned to me? A lot of breaches happen because of integrity problems. We had a problem that illustrates this nicely where one of my staff members kept getting someone else's credit card statement. And every month we phoned the bank to say, you're sending us the wrong credit card statement. In fact, the staff member of mine isn't even one of your clients. And every month they said, cool, we've changed it. And the next month we got it again. Right. So that is an integrity issue. It means that their information isn't kept up to date. And we're going to talk quite a bit about that because that is a problem that we often see, that marketers are not managing their lists well. So that is something that you can be punished for in terms of POPI. And then lastly, you also need to protect that information from loss. You need to make sure that it remains available to the people in your organization that has to work with it. So POPI also looks at business continuity management. So how do you make sure that you don't accidentally delete or destroy information? So that's the CIA triad on the outside. We're doing well. We're about 150 seconds in. Then there's the bits on the inside, which is what I call the privacy bits, right? So there are things that POPI say you must do when you start planning to use personal information. And that thing is called a personal information assessment. It's where you make sure that you are going to follow all of the rules of POPI. So let's say you are planning to start a loyalty program. You shouldn't launch the loyalty program without doing a personal information assessment to make sure that you apply all of the principles of POPI. And this is called privacy by design. Right? So it means that when you design your loyalty program, when you design your marketing campaign, you've taken POPI into account even before you've done anything with personal information. Then there are rules about where you can get the information from. So the companies that traditionally fare quite or are quite severely affected by legislation like POPI are guys who, for instance, scrape the internet for personal information. POPI is incredibly strict about where you can get information from. This is so important that we are basically going to devote most of Wednesday to it. So where can you get information from? Can you buy information? Can you scrape it from the internet? Can you use information that comes from public sources? I'm going to touch on it later today, but we're going to focus quite a lot of our attention on it on Wednesday. Then once you have the information, there's the question of whether you can use it. Can you use it for direct marketing? And we're going to talk about what direct marketing isn't just now. Can you use the information for direct marketing? And that's where consent comes in. But you don't always need consent. So this is one of the myths that we're going to bust today. You don't always need consent to do direct marketing. There are exceptions to that rule. So we're going to talk about that. When we are thinking about using the information, we also often have to talk about whether we can share it with other people. So we can talk about that. We're going to talk about that as well. POPIA obviously limits the sharing of personal information. You need to have a very specific and good reason to do that. And sometimes you need permission before you can share a person's personal information with someone else. So again, for those of you, well, as we're thinking about it, you will see that stuff like data broking, in other words, the buying and selling of personal information, is going to become quite a bit more complicated as a result of this legislation. And then lastly, and very hypothetically, you can't just keep the information forever. If you no longer have a reason to keep it, you need to destroy it. That is very hypothetical. Most people I know never destroy anything. That's because as humans, we are hoarders. We always think, what if I need it again? What if? So usually we can find a reason to keep stuff, but nonetheless, this is a principle in POPIA, is that once you don't have a sort of feasible reason anymore to have the information, that you need to get rid of it, and you need to do that securely as well. That is the 300-second challenge. We have some time to spare. But basically, as you can see, POPIA has implications for every single step in what we call the information lifecycle. That's from planning to destruction. And then it also says you need to keep the information secure while you have it. So that is as much general stuff as I'm going to give to you today. We're going to get very specific now. Now we're going to talk about direct marketing. Right. So before we launch into what POPIA says about direct marketing, let's quickly talk about what it is. So when I say direct marketing, what do I mean? Okay, so there are all different kinds of channels that you guys use to do direct marketing. So the most obvious one, and the one that irritates most people the most, is telemarketing. And POPIA absolutely applies to telemarketing. This is one of the other myths, and those I'm going to repeat, right? But the other myths is that POPIA doesn't apply to telemarketing. POPIA absolutely applies to telemarketing. There's just one tiny deviation between telemarketing and other forms of direct marketing, which I will talk about a bit later. So telemarketing is direct marketing. Email marketing, so we're sending stuff to people, that is considered direct marketing. SMSs, any form of direct message that we send via, there are now so many platforms I can't keep up. But if we are sending any direct messages to people that contain sort of promotional information, that's considered direct marketing. Even when you are doing behavioral advertising online, right? So this could be, targeted messaging through social media platforms. If you know who you are sending it to. So if you know you are sending it to Elizabeth, it's direct marketing, right? So I know you get other kinds of targeted marketing on social media platforms where all I know is I told Facebook I would like this ad to appear on the pages or on the timelines of 10,000 women in the Western Cape. I don't know who they are. Facebook doesn't tell me. That's not direct marketing because I don't know who I'm communicating to. I also don't have their personal information. But if I send Facebook a list of my customers and I say, you must place this ad on the timeline of these 10,000 customers, then I am direct marketing because I know very well who I'm sending that information to. If I place an ad in a magazine, that's not direct marketing. I don't know who's going to buy the magazine. I might know certain general things about the demographic, the demographics of people who tend to buy that magazine, but I don't know them by name. I can't identify them. That's not direct marketing. Okay, so the test for whether something is direct marketing is, are you sending a promotional message? either promoting a brand or a product or a service to a person, and you know who it is that you are sending the information to, or you could reasonably find out who they are, right? Then it is direct marketing. What is a promotional message? It is anything that you send to promote a brand, even if it is just to promote consciousness of that brand or brand values, or promoting a product or service. It can be direct or indirect, right? So even if it is content marketing in the sense that there's no call to action, you're just sending, let's say, advertorial content, that will still be considered direct marketing if you are sending it to specific people who you know who they are, right? So the Act says it's for the direct or indirect purpose of promoting that particular product or service, right? So even stuff that we send that might from the outside appear completely sort of altruistic, we're sending you information to be helpful. There's no selling, call to action at the end of the message. Even that will be seen as an indirect promotion of that particular brand. So the minute the organization who is sponsoring the content can be identified, if it is being sent to identifiable individuals, then the regulator will probably view it as direct marketing. Okay, so that is what direct marketing is. Okay, so what does POPIA say about it? And POPIA actually says quite a lot about it. And over the years, people tend to focus on certain parts of POPIA. The consent provisions, for instance, has received a lot of focus. But actually, POPIA says a great deal about direct marketing. There's very little in sort of the process of sending marketing to people that won't be in some way, shape, or form affected by this legislation. So I'm going to take you through it step by step. Right. So firstly, POPIA asks the question, where did you get the information that you are using, right? So as I said, on Wednesday, we're going to talk about building your mailing list, but I want to mention this briefly today as well. So I think the biggest impact that POPIA will have on marketing is how it influences how we get our leads, right? So POPIA changes, for instance, there's a section in POPIA, and this is also fairly unique, that says that you must get information directly from the person to it relates. In other words, if you want to know what my cell phone number is, you must ask me, right? Luckily, there are exceptions to this rule, right? So you can go and collect my personal information from a public record that is administered by a public body. Okay, so if my information is in a public record, which is administered by a part of the government, then you are entitled to collect my information from there. The internet is not a public record, right? So a lot of the businesses that we've seen fare poorly once data protection legislation is put in place are companies that scrape the internet, right? So they slurp up any piece of personal information that they can find on the internet. They do poorly because once they have that information, usually they need to contact all of the people whose information they have, and at the very least notify them what information they have, what it's going to be used for, and possibly even get their consent or give them an opportunity to object. So you need to ask yourself, where are we getting our information from? Is it a reputable source? Let's say it's a credit bureau. Well, has that credit bureau got the permission of the person to sell the information to us? The other source, legitimate source of personal information, is if you can prove that I deliberately put that information about me on the internet myself. That's very difficult to prove, right? So for instance, we know a lot of companies will go and mine LinkedIn, right? So they will become contacts, or they will link up with people and then scrape the internet off there. But that is not information that I deliberately made public. I only disclose that information to my connections, and so that is problematic. And then there's also, always you can get consent to gather a person's information, but that is often not practical. So where you get the information that you're using is very important. What we've seen overseas is there's been a renewed focus on what is called first-party databases. In other words, having only people on the database that you actually have a relationship with. So whether they have already corresponded with you about products or services, etc. these databases are becoming very, very valuable. Then there's always the question then is what you're going to be doing direct marketing. And we've spoken about what is and isn't direct marketing, but again, just to emphasize this, it's direct marketing if you know who you're communicating to and you're sending a message directly to them using whatever channel, right? POPI will also affect the channels that you can and can't use, right? And the reason for that is, so let's say, so the rules about consent for direct marketing says the following, right? So if you are cold calling, right? You're speaking to people who you've never spoken to before. In fact, they're going to be quite surprised to hear from you. That is unsolicited direct marketing. And the rules are going to change now. So if you are doing electronic direct marketing, that's everything except telemarketing. You are now going to have to ask me for my permission before you send me the marketing. Right? So let me repeat that again. Everything except telemarketing, if you are cold calling, in other words, if it's unsolicited, you are going to have to get my permission first, and you are allowed to ask me once. Okay. And that permission, according to the information regulator, needs to be per channel, right? So you need to be specific as to which channels you're going to be using. So if you're going to be using email, your consent needs to be, can I contact you via email, or can I contact you via SMS? For telemarketing, because that is not seen as electronic marketing, the rule will be just as it is now. You can do telemarketing without consent, except you have to give the person the opportunity to unsubscribe. And if they unsubscribe, you must listen to them. A lot of complaints are about consumers who tried to unsubscribe, but the company didn't listen to them. They kept phoning them. Okay. So that's why what channel you're using is relevant, because your consent when you are doing unsolicited direct marketing needs to be very specific. The next question that we ask is this person a new prospect or are they already a client? And why that is relevant is, let's say, you know, it's now the 2nd of July next year. So POPIA has now come into effect. Do you have to reconsent your database? And the answer is not always. Okay, so this is the hardest part, I think, of POPIA for marketers to understand is if the people you're contacting, if this is not unsolicited marketing, in other words, you got their information as part of them either inquiring or purchasing a product or a service. And at that time, you told them that you would be using their information to send them marketing material. And at that time, you told them that they can unsubscribe. And if they were able to unsubscribe every time you contacted them, you don't have to reconsent them once POPIA comes into effect. Right, so existing clients or people who have been in contact with you in the past and signed up for newsletters, etc., you don't have to reconsent your base. As long as they knew that was what you were going to use their information for, and you gave them an opportunity to unsubscribe and you continue to give them an option to unsubscribe throughout the time that you were contacting them, then you don't have to reconsent your base. I am, as I told you, a rehabilitated lawyer. What that means is even if the law technically says you have to reconsent, I'm going to sit with you and talk you through, you know, the practicalities of it and whether you should be aiming for 100% compliance, because sometimes it's very low risk not to reconsent, and I'd rather not do it because, as you guys know, once you send that email saying, do you consent to receive our newsletter, quite a few people are not even going to open it. Of those people who don't open it, a lot of them are not going to respond, not because they don't want your newsletter, just because they couldn't be bothered. So inertia is a problem. And so what you will find is you will lose a massive amount of people on your database who just won't answer, even though they may want to get your direct marketing. So that's why on Wednesday, we're also going to talk quite a lot about alternative strategies to reconsenting your database. But know that the rule of thumb is, if this person has never heard of you before, So it is unsolicited electronic direct marketing. You're going to need consent. If you have been speaking to this person because they've already inquired about a product, or they've already bought something from you, or they bought something from another company in your group, even, but maybe depending on how good your notifications were, if you told them that you were going to use the information for direct marketing and you gave them an opportunity to unsubscribe, then you might not have to reconsent them. Okay. So let's say you are sending unsolicited direct marketing. The next question is, okay, I have to now contact them first to get their consent. What does that consent have to look like? Okay, and there is a form that was attached to the regulations to POPI that were published in December 2018. It's called Form 4. It is a terrible form. I hope no one from the information regulator is listening, because it is really horrible. Luckily, if you go and read the regulations carefully, what it says is it doesn't say you have to use that form for consent. It has to just be substantially similar. And what that says is you have to be specific. You have to say what products you're going to be marketing very broadly, and you have to say which channels you're going to be using to send the marketing. So if it's an email newsletter, say email. If it is SMSs, say SMS. If it is something else, like social media marketing, say that, right? And it has to be an opt-in, right? It has to be an opt-in. What does that mean? Well, it means that if you don't hear from them, you can't market to them, because the default is they're out unless they let you know that they're in. That's an opt-in. An opt-out is a pre-ticked box. In other words, if you hear nothing from them, you can market to them. POPI, when it is about unsolicited direct marketing, requires an opt-in. Okay. The next thing that is incredibly important is that opt-in, that consent can't be hidden in your T's and C's. It has to be explicit, which means that it has to be a box that they tick. It must be expression of will. So it can't, so a lot of people, what they're saying is, okay, so let's say I subscribe to an app. In the app terms, it says by subscribing to this app, you consent to us sending you direct marketing, or you consent to our partners sending you direct marketing. That is not a legal consent. That consent needs to have a little tick box, and it needs to be outside of the terms and conditions. In other words, I need to be able to subscribe for the app and say, no, I don't want your direct marketing. It can't be what my team calls a fit-in or F-off consent, right? So it can't be if you don't consent when you can't use the service. That is a big change for a lot of organizations. A lot of organizations go, well, if you want my goods, you must allow me to use your personal information for direct marketing. And that is something that is going to stop under POPI, because the consent needs to be voluntary and separate from the services or products that you are selling. Right, and now comes a very important point. And this is a conversation that I have very often. What is going to get you into trouble is probably not that you are sending unsolicited marketing. What's going to get you into trouble usually is that you don't have a good unsubscribe process. We see this every single month. I subscribe to newsletters just for fun to see how people manage them. And what I see very, very often is that people are not managing their lists properly. So let's say I receive a newsletter and I click on the unsubscribe link at the bottom. A lot of the times next month, I get the newsletter again. And that is because even though I unsubscribed, the company who's sending the marketing isn't actually monitoring the unsubscribes and isn't updating their list. Or what they're doing, even if they are using a platform like Everlytic, is every month they upload a new list, a new database. And that is a problem, because it means that you are not centrally managing your database. So when you upload that new list, all of the unsubscribes from last month isn't necessarily reflected. And that is what people complain about most, is when they've tried to unsubscribe. Most people will first try to unsubscribe. They won't just run to the regulator. There's probably the 0.01% of people who don't have anything better to do, like running to regulators. But most people will just try to unsubscribe and will only complain if you don't listen to them. So that is the moral of the story. If a person unsubscribes, you need to listen to them. And what is really important there is for marketers to get better at something that is called master data management. In other words, that you manage all of the information about your prospects in one place, right? So let's monitor all of the information of your prospects in one place, not 10,000 different databases saved in Excel spreadsheets on everybody's computers. Because the other thing, and this goes to point number 7, is that you must manage the information that you have. So think back at that bank example that I used, right? So what's happening there? Every month I'm getting someone else's credit card statement. I phone the call center and I say, this is wrong. This is not my credit card statement. They say, we're so sorry. We'll update the record. And I've got no doubt that that is what they're doing. They are updating the record. But what is happening is the company who is sending the statements out for them, bulk emails, the change isn't pulling through to the database that they have. So that is poor master data management. And what is the difference between the 2nd of July next year and this year is every time that bank sends me that email after I try to update the information is a breach of the act. So there can be serious consequences now. Also, often when we send things to the wrong email address, we're also disclosing someone else's personal information. So it is actually a data breach. So managing your information, I would say, is almost as important, if not more important, than the whole hoo-ha around, do you have consent to send the marketing? I would say that if you manage your database properly, you are probably getting rid of most of the POPI risks. But that is where we see the most shortcomings in most marketing departments. And then the last specific thing that POPI regulates about marketing is, can a person demand that I delete their information? And this is often the case, right? So a person, let's do a bit of role play. Let's say you are phoning me, let's use telemarketing. So even though you don't need my consent to do telemarketing, you still need to comply with everything else. So usually when someone phones me and tries to sell me something and I don't know who they are, right? So it's unsolicited. My first question is, where did you get my information? I have a right to know that once POPI comes into effect. You can't say, I don't know. You have to answer that question. Companies are getting fined for not being able to answer that question. And so I have a right to say, where did you get my information? Then I also have the right to say, don't ever phone me again. And you have to listen to me. And then what a lot of people will say is, you must delete all of my information. Except now you're in a bit of a conundrum, right? Because if I delete all of your information, how will I know not to contact you again? So at the very least, the answer to delete all of my information is, unfortunately, we can't, because we have to make sure that we don't contact you again. So we need to know which number not to call or which email address not to send our stuff to. So just be careful about that. There's no general right for people to demand that you delete their information, because often we have to at least keep some of the information for proof or to make sure that we process or honor their unsubscribe. So these are all of the things that POPI says about direct marketing, except everybody seems to be focusing quite a lot on consent. And while it is very important, particularly if you are doing unsolicited direct marketing, it is not, in my view, the most important thing. And when you're doing all of these things throughout, you have to think about the security of the information. So am I protecting the confidentiality of the information? Am I making sure that that information has integrity, that it is correct, that it is relevant, etc.? And then lastly, do I have measures in place to make sure that I can't lose the information? So the CIA triad. All throughout, we have to keep that information security top of mind. Then, what doesn't it say, POPI? Because now we're at the myths. And I'm going to repeat myself a little bit. I am aware of it. But these are things that are very, very important. Right, so firstly, will POPI stop spam, kill marketing? So see, there's a comma out of place there. Insert other overstatements, other bits of hyperbole there. Will Poppy make it impossible for us to do our jobs as marketers? No. There aren't many businesses that go out of business because of Poppy, or because of data protection legislation. It requires a different way of working, yes. It can have a significant impact on how you market, but it doesn't have to kill marketing. So in our sessions on Wednesday and Thursday, we're going to talk quite a lot about these trends that we see in marketing. Two of them are, we're seeing a trend away from third-party databases and others where you buy databases back to first-party databases. So that is where you actually go through the trouble of building up a relationship with the person who you want to sell to. The ROI, so say the experts on these first-party databases, are much higher than the third-party databases. So there's some positive things to think about there. On Thursday, we're going to talk about on Thursday we're going to talk about this new market segment called the privacy active. So a lot of companies are actually going for the people who they know take their privacy seriously, and there are a lot of companies making huge success out of it. So that's the other trend, is a lot of businesses are using privacy as a carrot to lure clients in. And then lastly, you're also seeing a move away from behavioral targeting. So, targeting people online based on, third-party tracking cookies, etc., to more context targeting. In other words, we're not targeting specific individuals. We're deciding to put our content in certain places because of the context. And I'll share some of the recent data on that with you as well. So no, Poppy will not kill direct marketing. It might make our lists smaller, but it will also improve the quality of our databases if you do it right. The other myth is that Poppy doesn't apply to telemarketing. Poppy absolutely applies to telemarketing, particularly about where you got my cell phone number from in the first place. The only thing in Poppy that doesn't apply to telemarketing is if you're asking, well, do we need an opt-in consent? No, you don't for telemarketing, but you still have to honor people's unsubscribes. The other myth that you see lawyers are spreading is they're saying to the marketing departments, you must reconsent your whole database. I'm going to talk about why lawyers are giving you that advice shortly, and I apologize for the lawyers who are on the line. I am a lover of all lawyers. I am one myself, but sometimes we're under pressure and we don't think our advice through necessarily. Don't just reconsent your whole database. There are a number of reasons why, and we will talk about them again on Wednesday. Then the other myth is just put a consent in your terms and conditions and you're good to go. No, so again, it can't be a fit-in or F-off consent, can't be part of a service. For instance, subscribing to an app or something. It has to be a separate question that we ask and give people a box to tick, and it has to be voluntary. So they have to be able to say no. They have to also be able to say yes today and withdraw that consent tomorrow. And generally speaking, regulators frown on saying, well, if you withdraw your consent, you can't use our services anymore. The other myth is that you're going to get fined 10 million Rand on the 2nd of July if you don't comply. This is also something that lawyers like doing, is scaring people. Firstly, the regulator is not going to start fining people on the 2nd of July. The regulator doesn't even have investigators yet, and has a very, very limited budget. Also, and we've seen this time and time again, it takes a couple of years for regulators to start investigating people and get around to fining them. Lastly, the 10 million Rand fine is the maximum. Something pretty bad needs to happen before you can get fined the maximum. Many of the fines will be considerably smaller. You will see we're getting close to talking about Winnie the Pooh. Why I say that is important, because sometimes you're going to want to take an educated risk. You also can't really go to jail if you don't comply. You will go to jail if you don't cooperate with the information regulator, which is obviously not advisable. But it's not as bad as some of these newsletters that I've seen go around says it is. And then lastly, another myth is that Winnie the Pooh is a boy. Winnie the Pooh originally was actually a girl. And now you think, why is this crazy person talking about Winnie the Pooh? I thought we're talking about Poppy. It's because one of my favorite quotes about risk management comes out of Winnie the Pooh. And here it is. Supposing a tree fell down, Pooh, and when we were underneath it. Supposing it didn't, said Pooh after careful thought. Piglet was comforted by this. Right, so you will see, particularly when we talk again, that I believe in a risk-based approach. In other words, I weigh up the restrictions that I put on a company's ability to market. So, for instance, saying you must reconsent your whole database, and the cost of that against the risk. Right? So what is the risk if we don't reconsent our database? Well, actually, if we look at consumer behavior, as long as you are processing the unsubscribes properly, 99.99% of the time, if a person doesn't want your marketing, they'll tell you to stop. And as long as you stop, that's the end of it. So is it then not okay to take a little bit of a risk by not reconsenting your entire database? And we'll be applying this principle throughout the sessions this week to see, okay, is strict compliance really necessary? Or can we take an intermediate sort of approach and preserve our database and make sure, just make sure that we manage the risk appropriately? And how I believe in taking risks is that it is entirely okay as long as it is an educated risk. In other words, let's not be unconsciously incompetent, let's be consciously incompetent. And I am okay with that. But let me tell you who's not okay with it. Most lawyers. Right. So I just want you for today to understand why it is that you're getting, and many of you will be getting advice from lawyers saying, you must reconsent your whole database. I don't care if you're going to lose 90% of them and therefore millions and millions of rands. It has to do with the way in which we were trained. So firstly, what you need to understand is that most lawyers don't know a single solitary thing about marketing. So when they give you the advice that you must reconsent their database, unless you tell them what that will do to your database, they wouldn't know. So you need to explain it to them. But don't use marketees, I call it. And I'm sorry, I know it's ironic because the lawyers use legalese. You need to explain to your advisors what the impact is of certain advice that they're giving you. Otherwise, they just won't know. Also understand that in our end, non-compliance with legislation is always a bad idea, right? So that's because that's how we were trained. Right? So it's kind of like that person that works with you who marks all of her emails urgent, and this means none of them are urgent, right? So we're a bit like that person. We're going to see any form of non-compliance as a disaster. So you need to tell your lawyer that you are willing to take an educated risk. Otherwise, they're going to always go for the no risk option, which is almost never the commercially advisable option. So again, take the time to go, okay, but this is what it's going to do to my marketing. And are we sure that the risk of non-compliance outweighs the risk of not actually being able to effectively market our products? Also, we work alone. That's mostly because people don't like us. So don't assume that we know what's going on in the organization. So you need to be proactive about this. I would suggest that for those of you who haven't had a conversation with your legal advisors about the implications of POPIA for marketing, that you be proactive about it, because otherwise we're going to in our little office, sit in our little offices and make a decision and, you know, write an email to the CEO without speaking to you. And by the way, I'm not condoning any of these things. That's just how things work. And then lastly, we do unfortunately firmly believe that everybody else is stupid. So don't play into that mistaken belief. Do your homework and come with an educated argument for why it would be okay for you to maybe color in outside the lines a little bit. So what we will do for this group of people by Thursday, when we've gone through all of these sessions, we will give you a little 2-pager that sets out all of the legal arguments that I'm going to be making across over these sessions. We will even put it on our letterhead so that you can use that when you speak to your legal advisors to say, look, but there are other lawyers who believe that we can do this, that, or the other thing. Okay, so that's me for today. And I see we've gone a little bit over time. And thank you for those of you who have stuck around. I see that there are 49 questions or comments. Karen, just please make sure that we do harvest these questions. Awesome. So what we are going to do is I'm going to work through the questions. I will start off the next session by answering some of them. So also just feel free to keep asking them and sending them to us, and then we will group them and get through them. But certainly make sure that by the end of Thursday we will get through all of the questions that you have. Okay. That's that. It's enough for today. Don't, too much lawyer per day is not good for anybody. So thank you for coming, and we'll see you again.